Crystal FM.
Yes, we are indeed. You're listening to the F4 show with David Summer. I'm very pleased to say that we have a very special guest this afternoon, TV psychotherapist, author and advice columnist, Christine Webber. Good afternoon, Christine.
Hi, David. How are you doing?
Can you hear me at the other end there? Okay, I know I mentioned this possibly a little bit quiet.
You are awfully quiet, but I'm sure I'm loud enough for both of us.
Yeah. Well, you're coming through very, very loud this end, so I'm very pleased to have you here. Christine, could I start by just asking you to define a few terms, because we all sort of hear words like psychotherapist, psychiatrist, psychologist. We don't necessarily know what they mean, so I was wondering if you could tell us exactly what a psychotherapist does.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in that people are very confused about these terms, and actually, not just lay people, journalists are, I think even some doctors are, really. In a nutshell, a psychiatrist is somebody who's trained as a medical doctor and gone on to specialize in mental health, and he or she may actually do kind of talking therapy with patients, but might not, might just do a lot of pharmaceutical, giving them drugs and looking after them in a very medical kind of a way. That's a psychiatrist. Obviously, many years of training, because a lot of training on top of the basic medical doctor training. A psychologist is somebody who's basically studied psychology at university, and from there on they make various choices, and they might become an academic psychologist. A lot do. Some psychologists go on to work for various big, corporations and what have you, and some do then train in actually dealing face-to-face with patients with various mental health difficulties, and they would be often referred to as clinical psychologists or chartered psychologists, or sometimes chartered clinical psychologists. I mean, it is a bit of a minefield, as you can imagine. And then there's a psychotherapist, which is a kind of posh word for counsellor, really. A psychotherapist is somebody who counsels, somebody who sits with a patient, or sometimes in group therapy, and will try and help that person to feel better and to perhaps see things in a slightly different way. And there are lots of different types of psychotherapy. I hope I haven't lost you all now.
Well, no, that's very interesting. Now, you actually began your career not I like to call it the healing professions, for want of a better word. But you actually began as a TV presenter at Anglia TV. What led you there, first of all?
Well, I only got there through failing dismally at quite a few other things before that, I'm afraid. I trained originally as a classical singer, and I thoroughly enjoyed that training, but it became quite apparent to me that I wasn't going to be the next Maria Callas or anybody of that ilk. So then I had to think again, and then I sort of went into light music, and I did do some shows and pantomimes and various other things. And then I thought it would be great to be in television, and it took me about 3 years, actually, from thinking this would be great to actually getting there. And in those days, I mean, this is before you were born, I'm sure,
How kind
they
you
used
are.
to have in-vision television announcers, which they don't have now. All the ITV stations, I think the BBC stations too, early on, but certainly well into the late 70s, early 80s, people all had their own individual in-vision announcers, and these were the people that kind of linked to programs and filled the hole if anything went wrong, and so on, which, as I say, it's all done out of vision now. And I just did lots of applications for lots of jobs up and down the country, including at Scottish television, I remember. And eventually, after doing a lot of auditions and a lot of pestering people, I finally got a job at Southern Television, as it was then, in the south of England, and then I got a job at Anglia Television, and I haven't long been there, actually, in continuity announcing, when they did promote me to be in the newsroom, and I started presenting, the regional evening news, and I loved that job, and I was there for 12 years.
Tell us a little bit about that. Was it sort of massive fun and really enjoyable? How did that go?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Tell us a little bit about what it was like in those early days of being a news presenter at Anglia.
Well, it was, I think I was in it a very good time, because ITV was well established with its sort of 14, 15 companies up and down the country. There was a lot of money in television at that time, and it was before, well, I was in it actually even before Channel 4 started, but certainly before the proliferation of all the satellite channels and then digital and everything. So at that time, as some older listeners might remember, I mean, really, you've got a choice of 3 channels. So if you did the regional news at 6 or 6:30 every night, you were somebody that was in people's living rooms every single night. People would come up to you and say, "I always watch you." And I mean, they did, because people had a great deal of brand loyalty then. And of course there was no, huge choice like there is today. So it was a very different sort of thing from how it is now. And I mean, we were working to 9 counties, and there was a potential, I think, of something like 5 million people, and we would regularly work to something like 1.5 million. Well, there are plenty of programs that go out over the whole of the United Kingdom that would actually kill for those sort of figures now, because there's just so much television and there's only so many people watching it.
Can I take you back many years? By the way, thank you for thinking I'm a lot younger than I am. I'm almost certain actually now, because I spent a little bit of time over when I was very, very young at the holiday camps. I worked at the holiday camps over on that coast many years ago. I'm almost certain that I've seen you on TV back from way back then. So.
You must have been in short pants at the time, David.
I hope none of my listeners are going to give me away on this. Can I take you back to when you were very young? Whereabouts did you grow up?
Well, I had a Scottish mother and a father from the West Country, and we actually lived in South London. But I was really fortunate that I spent a large part of my holidays in Scotland, usually in part of it in Glasgow, in Govan, where my grandparents still lived, and then quite a bit of it in Edinburgh, because my favourite aunt lived in Edinburgh, and actually she only died earlier this year. She was 90, and so I spent a lot of time in Edinburgh. And when I was a student at the Guildhall School of Music in London, I used to spend the whole of the summer holiday, well, not quite the whole of it, but about 3 weeks of it. My aunt used to put up with me, and I used to come up to the Edinburgh Festival, and used to drag my aunt to things like leader recitals and things. And, bless her, she came with such good grace. I'm sure it wasn't her thing at all, but she loved an occasion, if we would go to the Usher Hall or something, and she'd say, "Oh, I think I've just seen James Robertson Justice." And I think, "Yeah, we have." And she loved seeing who was in the audience and everything, and that was really great.
I tell you what, I actually grew up in South London as well, so it's not all a bad thing.
Well, you've seen the light, quite obviously, David.
Yeah, heading north as soon as possible. Whereabouts in London? In South London?
Near Croydon.
Croydon, that's where I was born, in Croydon.
Oh, gosh. Oh, well.
We'll probably find that we're next door neighbours, but...
oh, gosh. Well, you'll probably agree with me. There's nothing much to commend it, so...
I was a little bit lucky. We won't go too far down this road, but I was actually grew up in Purley on the edges there, so it wasn't quite as grueling.
Sorry, you grew up what?
In Purley on the edges.
Oh, I know where that is. Because I live in Brighton now, so I go through Croydon all the time to go to London. And I usually think, oh, thank God I haven't got to get off here. So
yeah, in those days in Purley, it was a pretty leafy little suburb. I think it's probably changed a little bit now. Now, I asked you to choose some of the music for us this afternoon, and the first one we're going to put on is Kenneth McKellar and the Rowan Tree. Now, you gave me a little bit of background of why you chose each of these tracks. So I was wondering if you'd share that with our listeners.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to do that. Well, my mother had a very fine contralto voice. I mean, never... did anything with it apart from sing in church choirs and things, but she did have a really, really lovely voice. And she also really loved this song, The Rowan Tree, and so when she died about 8 years ago, we actually had a piper play this as the coffin came in. And I should explain that this was not a terribly, desperately sad day, because she'd had Alzheimer's for about 15 years, the last 5 years of which had been really ghastly, actually, undignified, horrible, the sort of thing that, frankly, my mother would not have wanted to put up with, but had no option. And so when she finally died, it actually, I think, really everybody close to her felt it was just a relief and a release all round. And so we did turn her funeral into a happy day with lots of music and flowers and everything. And certainly I don't think it would have been complete had we not had somebody playing the Rowan Tree. If we could have got Kenneth McKellar to sing it now, that would have been even better.
O rowan tree, now die be dear to me, entwine that we money time, O him and infancy. My leaves when I the past to spring, my flowers the summer's pride. There was no take a bonny tree in all the countryside. Oh, rowan tree. Thy spreading shade, the burn is rundy run. They put thy bonny berries red, and necklaces they strike. My mother, oh, I see her still, she smiled our sports to see. On her lap, and Jamie at her knee. Oh, rowan tree. Oh, there arose my feathers prayer in holy evening's calm. How sweet was then my mother's voice in the mother's psalm. Lord, again we meet never underneath the rowan tree. But how thoughts around thee come, O him and infancy.
Round Tree of the choice of my guest, Christine Webber, TB psychotherapist, author, and advice columnist. I have to be honest, Christine, I don't actually know what a round tree is, but I don't think it entirely matters. Any ideas yourself?
I think I have seen them. I'm not really sure. I think it has a berry on it, doesn't it? I'm not sure. I'm sure some of your listeners will know very much better than I do.
Somebody will tell us, yeah. Now, you've written several books, and we decided just to talk about a couple this afternoon. Mm-hmm. I think they're both available from Amazon. The first one is How to Mend a Broken Heart. Now, that's a topic that many of us would clearly like to know more about. Can you give us some hints?
Yeah, I think if I cast my own mind back to about 1983, 84, I could certainly have done with that book myself, actually. I think that most of us at some point have had, and if we haven't, we're very lucky, have had some sort of devastating end of a relationship. Or sometimes I think people can feel brokenhearted about other things, maybe the loss of a job or the loss of a pet sometimes for people. All sorts of reasons why you might feel brokenhearted, but it's a very lonely place. And I think sometimes the really bad feelings go on for such a long time that you fear for your sanity. And so about, about 2004, I think, I was asked to write another book for a series I was doing called Help Yourself Books for Hodder. And so I chose this, and it did sell. I mean, it was not a bestseller by any means, but it did sell steadily. And and then about 18 months ago, I rewrote it slightly, and it was turned into an e-book for Bloomsbury Reader, and it still sells steadily. And I think that just, you know, when you are feeling brokenhearted, if you kind of Google that, fortunately for me, that particular title comes up. So, and it's really all about, first of all, accepting that this awful thing has happened to you, which may sound an odd thing, but certainly what I see or have seen in myself, and also have seen in patients in my own consulting room, is very often people are brokenhearted, but they haven't even got to the point where they can go, and this is really over. They still go, he was so wonderful, or she was so wonderful, and I'm sure she'll see the error of her ways, or, you know, I think she will come back, or I think that he will realize what he's missing. And I think for as long as people in that kind of state of denial, you might say, it's very hard for them to get over things. So the book really starts with accepting that you are in this predicament, and actually really opening yourself up to the pain, which is a difficult thing for us all. And then it's about, you know, what you do about that and how you look after yourself or get other people to look after you. And then it moves on to getting over it and strategies for doing that, and then really moving on and starting your life again, romantically or whatever. And, you know, hopefully it has helped a number of people, and certainly quite a lot of people that I've seen as patients have you know, come to me because they read the book. So hopefully it is of use to people.
Is there anything practical, maybe one or two practical ideas that someone listening who's maybe going through...
Yeah, I mean, one very good thing, if you're still in that awful stage where you think you've been dumped by somebody who was utterly perfect, is to write a list of all the things that you don't miss about that person. And at first people say, but you know,
that's genius.
he was perfect, or she was wonderful. You think, yep, okay, now just start thinking about the things that used to really upset you, or make you cross, or irritate you, or bore you. Write those down, and you'd be amazed how quickly that list grows. And you do realize that, you know, you can begin to look at that past relationship in a rather different way, and instead of thinking that was perfect and now I've ruined it, or he has or she has dumped me, you can think, well, perhaps it wasn't quite as perfect as I think. So to look at the reality of it is very good. The other thing, sounds as if all I do is get people to make lists, and I suppose that to some extent there's a bit of truth in that. Another thing is that, you see, when you are in that situation, you tend to blame yourself, and you tend to feel very down about yourself, and to think that you're no good, and that nobody will want you again, and that kind of thing. And I always encourage people to really look at their own value and to appreciate it more. And one very good way of doing that is to gradually compile another list, and this can take quite a while when people are very down, a list of 50, that's 50, things about themselves that they like. And sometimes people say, well, I can't think of anything. It'll just take me a week. I've only got 2 things. And you can work with them and say, well, you know, have you done something kind today? Oh, well, yes, actually, I bought a big issue and I sort of crossed the road to do it. Well, that was quite a nice thing. Do you think that was a nice thing about you? Well, yes. Okay, well, why don't you put that down on your list? So eventually you get to the point where somebody's got 50 things about themselves they like. And then what I encourage them to do is to get 10 small cards, like those sort of filing cards that people used to have, less so now that everything's digital, but, you know, about kind of 2/3 of the size of a postcard, I suppose, and to write on them, get 10 of those and write 5 of those points on each card. And then I get people to shuffle those cards and to read those cards out loud to themselves, out loud, first thing in the morning, middle of the day, last thing at night. And it's amazing how helpful that can be, because what you're really doing is you're asking people to sort of retrain their mind and to start looking at what their value is, as opposed to focusing on all the bad things and the things that they're not so good at.
Can people changing their environment help at all?
Can they change within their environment?
No, can they change, like actually move out of their environment for a while or something like that? Does that help?
Well, they can, and sometimes that does help, although I have known an awful lot of people that make a rash and swift decision after, maybe the death of somebody or a divorce, and they feel all at sea then, because their points of reference have all gone. For some people it's really good, for other people not so good. Sometimes people go off on a holiday and then find they've just taken all their misery with them, and that perhaps they would have been better battling through while doing normal things, surrounded by all those good friends that love them and want to help them. I mean, I think that one of the best things you can do is just open yourself up to your friends and your family who love you and want to help you.
Do you feel as a society that sometimes we're too dependent on relationships?
Well, I might have said that at one time, but, interestingly, of course, there are more single households in this country than ever before, and in the over 50s, I only happen to know this, I don't normally spout statistics, but my husband and I were writing a piece for The Spectator, and it appeared that in the last 10 years, in the over 50s, there are 833,000 more single households than there were 10 years ago. So what does this tell us? I think what it tells us, actually, is that as people get older, where they would always, I think, if they'd got a relationship, have sort of stuck with it and just thought, well, better the devil you know, and also I'm not that confident about either being alone or finding somebody else. People are much less inclined to do that now, and they actually think, there's more to life than this. If I'm really hating this relationship, I'm going to enjoy a single life with my women friends or my men friends, and maybe I'll find love again, or maybe I won't. But so I'm not sure that people feel that they're a lesser person unless they're on somebody's arm. I'd like to think, actually, that they don't feel that as much as they did, say, 20 years ago.
It's very interesting. I think possibly society's moved on a little bit from that whole thing. That was almost a stigma at one point to be single.
Yes. Well, I really don't think it is now. I think a lot of people see it as a glorious adventure, and jolly good for them.
Now, if you'd like to find out more about some of the things that Christine has been talking about today, you can go to our website, which is christineweber.com. Now, we're going to move to your second choice, Christine, which is, I was very fascinated to read what you put as your reasons for choosing Elaine Stritch, and I'm Still Here. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when I was at Anglia, they actually, at that time, had a really good drama department, and they made lots of excellent things. All the Inspector Dalgleish things by P.D. James, for example. But they also, in my very early days there, did a series called Tales of the Unexpected, which began with stories by Roald Dahl, which were very, very good stories. And they attracted really top names into these stories. And actually, for people that have got Sky Arts, they often repeat them on those, and I love watching them now. Anyway, Elaine Stritch came to do one of them. I think she did more than one. And I was obviously a fairly, well-known, in quotes, celebrity in a very small part of, the UK. And here, in the same canteen queue, was this massive, massive star. I mean, just star of stage and screen, and brilliant. And I just loved her. And I wanted to go and speak to her so badly, but I just didn't have the courage to do it, so I didn't. But I just have always really admired her and her kind of feistiness and her verve, and I love her singing. And this is her saying, "She's still there, I'm still here." And I just think, well, that could become my theme tune perhaps as I get older. Hopefully, if I'm still around at 90, 95, I'll be knocking this one out.
I'll tell you what, I've left a little bit of banter that's in the beginning of this recording in, because it kind of illustrates the point that you're making.
Good.
Crystal FM.
what did Richard Burton mean, almost? Not long ago, I was talking to Stephen Sondheim about his song, I'm Still Here. I told him that I had heard women in their 60s sing I'm Still Here. 50s, even. And a couple of times in their 40s. I'm still here. Where have they been? I mean, it's ridiculous. And so I told him that, not that he asked me or anything, but I told him that I would never touch that song until I was, 80 years old. That makes sense to me. 80, I'm still here. But you know, it is such a great song. I'm not going to wait 20 years to sing it. What are you laughing at? Good times and bum times, I've seen them all, and my dear, I'm still here. Plush velvet sometimes just pretzels and beer. But I'm here. I've stuffed the daily in my shoes, strummed ukuleles, sung the blues, seen all my dreams disappear, but I'm here. I've slept in shanties, guest of the WPA, but I'm here. Danced in my scanties, $3 a night was the pay, but I'm here. I've stood on bread lines with the best, watched while the headlines did the rest. In the Depression, was I depressed? Nowhere near. I met a big financier, and I'm here. I've been through Gandhi, Wally, and Windsor's affair, but I'm here. Amos and Andy, Marjan and platinum hair, but I'm here. I got through AB's Irish Rose, 5 Dion babies, Major Bowles, had heebie-jeebies, 4 BBs, Bathysphere. I lived through Brenda Frazier, and I'm here. I've gotten through Herbert and J. Edgar Hoover. Gee, that was fun and a half. When you've been through Herbert and J. Edgar Hoover, anything else is a laugh. I've been through Reno. I've been through Beverly Hills, and I'm here. Reefers and vino, rest cures, religion and pills, but I'm here. Been called a pinko, commie tool, got through it stinko by my pool. I should have gone to an acting school, that seems clear. Still, someone said she's sincere, so I'm here. Black sable one day, next day it goes into hot, but I'm here. Top billing Monday, Tuesday you're touring in stock, but I'm here.
Oh, it does go on for a little bit longer, so we might not go quite to the end there, but that was Elaine Stritch, and I'm Still Here. Obviously you really like her.
I like really feisty women, and I'm not sure they'll always be that easy to live with. Not that I've never tried, but I just really admire them, you know.
Is that because you're a little bit feisty in your own way?
I think you'd have to ask other people about that.
Now, listen, switching the subject slightly, or quite a long way, really, I was fascinated to see somewhere on your website was a little bit about, I don't know if it's Buddhism as much as book techniques from the Buddhist, I don't know, school or whatever, sort of things like meditation.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and how that fits in modern day sort of
Yeah,
practice?
absolutely. Well, one of the things that I've trained in is cognitive behavior therapy, which some people will know about, particularly because it's much more available on the NHS now than it ever was.
Is that based on neuro-linguistic programming, or is that something else?
Well, no, it's not really like that. Cognitive behavior therapy is really looking at ways of kind of assessing what your thoughts are and seeing if they're A, helpful to you, but B, whether they're actually really very rational or logical. And often you're saying something like, well, I'm hopeless at that, say. And during cognitive behavior therapy, you would be working with a therapist who'd say, well, okay, that seems as if that's a very damning way to think about yourself. Is there another way we could look? First of all, could we look at what you're good at? And could we actually also examine the evidence of your statement that, well, I'm hopeless at that, or and so it looks at ways of assessing your thoughts in a more rational and realistic way, which is often helpful. And it's really based on something that goes way back. The Stoic philosophers, there was one called Epictetus, and he had a saying, obviously not in English, but as far as I understand it, the translation is really, it's not things that upset us, it's our view of things. And if you think about it, that's really true, because 5 people, perhaps, are, I don't know, on a railway station and the train is very, very late. So it's an identical situation for everybody, but those 5 people will react in very different ways to that being late. One might say, oh, good, I've got time to have a cup of coffee. One might go, these things always happen to me. One might think, well, I'll sit down and do my emails and wait. So we'd all respond in a different way, and the reason we would do that is because it isn't the thing itself, it's the thing plus a combination of how we are thinking or feeling that produces the sort of end consequential emotion or thought. So that's cognitive behavior therapy. And into that mix, some years ago, came this idea that actually one of the problems with people when they're feeling very anxious or very depressed or very upset is partly there's a feeling that, oh, no, I can't feel that again. I must escape from that. It's just too much. It's overwhelming. You might feel that, obviously, if you're broken-hearted. Oh, I can't feel that. It's just too awful. I won't get through it. And so people began to look at whether more meditative ways of actually just being with that pain, sometimes physical pain or mental pain, and that is the basis, really, of a lot of meditation and a lot of Buddhist thinking. And out of that emerged what people now call mindfulness, which a lot of people will have heard of, in which you kind of train yourself to be in a moment and really experience that moment very fully, and to realize that you can be in that moment with whatever your thoughts or pain might be in that moment. I don't know that I've explained that very well, but there's quite a reasonable explanation actually on my website under the heading Christine Comments called Mindfulness, which anybody who's interested might want to have a little look at.
I think I'm right in saying that, I don't know if there's such a thing as a true Buddhist, but a Buddhist might consider anyone who's not really happy, for want of a better word, at any different point, that point where they're not happy, I don't want to use the word mentally ill, but dysfunctional. Would that, in a way, be a fair description of mental illness, is when we're unable to cope? As you say, some people could, you say one thing to a person, totally happy about it, say another thing, and it sort of ruins their day. Could you almost call that, a little bit of mental illness in a small bracket somehow? Would that be a fair comment, or is that pushing it too much?
I think that's an interesting thought. I think, there's a sort of mental unease about things, and very often at some point in the development of that unease, you've almost got a choice in a sort of split second of how you're going to react. And I think that there are ways definitely of, and by the help of things like mindfulness or CBT or something, you can actually train yourself to spot that moment where there's a choice and realize that you don't need to go down the same road that you always have gone down. And that's, that these are difficult things for people. And often when people are very distressed, trying to do something that will help themselves just feels like the most ginormous effort and really, really difficult. And yet very often those things that they will choose to do for themselves could be just the beginning of the key to feeling better. I mean, things like if you've been around the house all day and you're very, very miserable and you can hardly put one foot in front of the other, you might think the very last thing that would be useful to you would be to go out round the park and kick a football around with your son or grandson or something. You'd think, I can't possibly do that, I'd feel worse. But actually, you're probably feeling pretty bad anyway, so is it likely it will make you feel worse, and is there a possibility it might make you feel better? And often just doing something physical or different can be quite a good elevation of mood. So it's very complicated, isn't it? But I think that it's also very fascinating how we can learn to make ourselves more mentally healthy and strong.
Now, you've also written a book about aging, Too Young to Get Old.
Yeah.
So what's the keys there?
Again, I kind of wrote a book that I thought, that's the book I'd like to read, really. Because I was, how old was I wrote that? Well, I was well into my 50s by the time I wrote it, and some of it's out of date now. The stuff about pensions and things is way out of date. But I went to a very interesting talk once given by an American psychologist called Andrew Weil, and he talked about something called compressed morbidity. And I was very fascinated by this. I thought, well, what on earth is that? And essentially what it is, and I'm really oversimplifying now, is it's an idea that in an ideal world, we should all live as fully and vibrantly and healthily and actively as possible for as long as possible, and then get some illness, which will be a terminal illness that hopefully will not go on for longer than, say, a fortnight, just a time to sort of put your affairs in order, and then you pop off. So no, care homes, no long period of being immobile, poorly, aching, all of that. Now, I mean, wouldn't that be great if we could organize that, I thought. That would be really, really good, because I'm sure, like most people, I would like to live for a very long time, but I don't want to live for a very long time if I'm immobile, sad, unable to do things, unable to enjoy life. So the book was really kind of came out of that, because I just thought there are all sorts of things that you can't do to legislate for various illnesses. Some things come out of the blue, no matter if you've lived a very pure and healthy life. But there are a lot of things that you can do, and I just wanted to put together an idea of how to stay as healthy as possible for as long as possible, but also to have lots of fun. So to look at, how you deal with your money, how you deal with your friends, how you deal with beauty if you're a woman, and, those things. So I kind of put it together, and that was that.
Do you think we spend too much time as we get older worrying about dying?
Worrying about dying? Yeah, I mean, I suppose people could do. It doesn't seem much point to me. But yeah, I mean, I think what's better is to focus on doing the stuff that you can do, which is to stay as fit as possible for as long as possible. And not everybody is actually able to do that, because you might have a disability or something that prevents you from doing that. But a large number of us, the greater number of us can. And it seems to me, I mean, when I've seen patients who've been perhaps physically ill as well as mentally uneasy, what I've noticed is the ones that are most concerned about the prospect or the possibility of dying are those that feel they haven't really lived life to the full. they say, I wish now I'd done so-and-so, and I just think that that's something to remember, and to try and think, well, when it does come to my last day on Earth, whenever that might be, and I hope it's not too soon, I'd like to be able to go, well, I've had a jolly good go at most things, because then I think you're more ready to go.
If you'd like to find out more about some of the books that Christine's Weber, and I think we just touched on about 2 out of 10, go to christineweber.com, and I'm sure there's links to many of them right there. Christine, just to kind of wrap up, you chose one last piece of music for us, which I believe kind of relates to your days back at Anglia TV.
Yeah, it does. Well, I was very fortunate. In 1988 and in 1990, some people might remember that there was a UK-based effort by ITV. They ran these telethons, and the money from it it's a bit like Children in Need or Comic Relief on the BBC. The money was sort of apportioned to groups up and down the country, and it was a very interesting initiative, and it was 27 hours of television non-stop. And I hosted on both those occasions the Anglia bit, which was on, obviously the regional bit was only something like, 7 minutes in every 30 minutes, and Michael Aspel was kind of coordinating it all from London. But it was a terrific thing to be part of. And it was just amazing, how much energy one drew from it. You'd think you'd be absolutely exhausted at the end of it, but really felt sort of elevated and inspired. And in 1990, the theme tune of it, I don't know if it was nationwide or just at Anglia, was this next song, Perfect Day. And I just, when I hear it now, I still kind of feel that kind of slight tearful excitement that, at the end of 27 hours where millions and millions and millions of pounds have been raised for good causes.